Hello, and welcome to All the Games You Like Are Bad. I'm your teetotaling cardboard pusher, Mark Bigney, and today we're going to be taking a look at Dragon and Flagon. I've been informed, however, by my support staff that there is a prepared statement that they would like me to read. Yeah, okay, fine. All the Games You Like Are Bad has finally become an enterprise of consequence because we have a website. Click the URL in the description. Do it or we won't be your friend. Also give us thumbs, likes, friend zones, and digihugs, or Mark is in serious danger of doing himself bodily... screw that. I feel like I want to take a shower. Anyway, so the Dragon and Flagon was designed by Geoff, Brian, Sidney, Harpo, and Moon Unit Engelstein, and published by Stronghold Games. And indeed, one of the best parts of Gen Con this year for me was watching Stephen Buonocore, the publisher, vamp it up like a madman in his monk getup at the official launch event. I fell in love with the game instantly when I saw the game set up. I mean, look at that. As a miniatures gamer, I love it when there's a palpable sense of 3D elements and terrain. I mean, I still mourn the loss of Heroescape, and just look at that board. Tables and mugs and chairs and everything, it's great. I mean, the only sour note is the barrels. The barrels don't look right, but whatever, nobody's perfect. The art is also not really to my taste. I don't really like how it's done. I do, however, seriously appreciate how inclusive the cast is. Up to this point, I didn't know, for example, that fantasy adventurers weren't all white. I also didn't know that female barbarians were physically capable of wearing anything on their torsos. So good job on that score. I really appreciate it. So all of this, however, is also at odds with the gameplay. The art is very lighthearted. The board is all cool looking. And it sort of promises lighthearted fantasy adventure, and to a certain extent that's captured in the game. But the gameplay is very calculating and methodical, or at least the game encourages you to think that way. And this sort of cognitive dissonance in the game design is really something that I've come to expect in a lot of Engelstein designs. I'm going to talk about that later, but let's first talk about what Dragon and Flagon does really well. So Dragon and Flagon is an action programming game. This is where you plot out actions several turns in advance, and then they get executed one at a time, and you see how stupid you are for thinking that you could have gotten that done. For a long time, I thought that that's a kind of game that I hated, primarily because I hated Robo Rally. I really, really don't like Robo Rally. All the times that I've played it, it struck me as an arbitrary and stupid experience where you'd like to turn right, but you can't turn right because you didn't draw a turn right card, and somebody gets in your way purely by accident, or you get blocked by somebody else purely because they were blocked by something else that they couldn't anticipate, etc., etc. And this is one of those games where player elimination is actually a feature, not a bug, because you can try to go kill yourself and then you go do anything else with your life. But when Space Alert was released in 2008, it really changed my mind about action programming, because there, if something goes wrong, it's usually because you as a team, it being a co-op game, have failed to anticipate it correctly. And the arbitrariness even of the card draws is also smoothed out because it's a co-op game. If nobody draws a C card, you can, delegate to somebody who did. And it's very rare that the entire table is going to be absent the necessary card you need, so it's a question of, figuring out who needs to do what and when, and accommodating for plans going wrong. Another game with action programming that I really like, and I bring this up for a specific reason, is Gunslinger. Gunslinger did interesting things with action programming way back in '82. It had double-sided cards that it used for its actions, and it specifically made it so that you couldn't do this two different kinds of actions on the same turn if the system felt that they were incompatible. For example, you can't drop down to the ground and go prone on the same turn that you leap up into the air. So they put both of those actions on different sides of the same card. So if you put one down, you can't use the other one that turn. It's really cool. It also has a ridiculous attitude towards time, which I really appreciate. Every turn in Gunslinger is meant to represent 2 seconds of real time, and every turn is further subdivided into 5 segments. So yes, every action you do is no more than 2/5 of a second. It's fabulous. That having been said, it's very much an old school design. It's table heavy. It cares about details that nobody else cares about, like where you bought your ammo, or whether you hand-rolled it yourself, or the difference between a cap and ball revolver, or a single action revolver, or a double action revolver, stuff like that. And it's also got pretty arbitrary player elimination, because guess what? In the Old West, if you're playing with guns, someone might get shot in the face and eliminated on the first turn. So as a design, it's fascinating. As a game, it's got some problems. I bring this up because Geoff Engelstein, one of the designers of the Dragon and Flagon, clearly says that the Dragon and Flagon is sort of a re-implementation of a yet older game published in 1980 called Swashbuckler. And Swashbuckler is very much of the same vein as Gunslinger. It's unapologetically old school, replete with tables and charts and stats that don't really matter and cross-referencing and all that kind of stuff. And, for what it's worth, I enjoy doing that every once in a while, but I do appreciate it when a game design gets streamlined without getting rid of the spark that made it really cool. And I bring up this sort of pantheon of action programming because action programming has been used to model two different kinds of things. In Robo Rally, it was meant to represent that you were actually programming a robot. But in all these other designs, Gunslinger, Space Alert, and one assumes even in the Dragon and Flagon, it's meant to represent the perils and pitfalls of split-second decision-making. The idea here is that if the timescale is only 2 seconds long, or if you're in the middle of a crazed bar fight, you won't really be able to make good decisions. And to model that, the game has you as a player plan your decisions out several turns in advance. I find this an interesting conceit, and I think it works pretty well. It's a sort of fascinating disconnect between the player experience and the actual characters in the game. The characters in the game are making decisions in a split second in response to what's happening around them. And to model that, the players plan things out many turns in advance using careful calculation. Some people are bothered by that sort of disconnect. I find it a really interesting way to try to model what's going on by going in the opposite direction conceptually. So let's talk about what's good and let's talk about what's bad. First of all, I really like the way the Dragon and Flagon deals with time. Every action costs a certain amount of time, and it's your turn when your time marker is up. So if you do a really, really big action, other people are going to have more smaller things to do in the interim before you act again. This has been done in other games. It was done in Thebes, which is a pretty straightforward risk-taking Euro game. It was also done in the World of Warcraft collectible miniatures game. I really liked that game, despite having zero enthusiasm for anything Blizzard has ever done. It used that same time elements, like, well, this attack costs you 2 time, this attack is slightly better but costs you 3, so situationally you might want to consider which one you want to use. Anyway, I like that mechanic and it's done well here. A solid majority of the actions you do will be 2 times, so very, very often everyone will be at the same time unit, but there's just enough variety in terms of the 1 time and 3 time actions to mix things up. So I do appreciate that. It's also the case that another thing that Dragon and Flagon does away with that Gunslinger and Swashbuckler had was in Dragon and Flagon you don't have enduring wounds. Even if you get slashed in the face, which is something that might happen, you're not going to take any permanent penalties for that. There's this reputation system. If I whack you and I do 2 points of damage, I take 2 victory points away from you, essentially. And what this does is it means that you're never really out of the game, at least in theory, and you don't have to deal with crippling wounds for the rest of the game, and I do appreciate that. It also takes a lot of the edge out of being targeted. For some reason, if it's just a matter of handing you over some points, I don't feel quite as aggrieved as if I get permanent injuries, both because I'm going to be having more fun in future turns, and also because I just feel like there's something transactional going on rather than purely aggressive. Anyway, so I think it does a good job of smoothing out the play experience, and I really enjoy that. Stunning is also really well done. If I whack you real good and I cause you to stun, all previous games of this kind and many other have you lose a turn or cancel a future action or something like that. And that's not fun. Losing a turn sucks. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Don't have lose a turn mechanics. They're not pleasant. Instead, what Dragon and Flagon makes you do is plan out an additional action. So instead of planning 2 turns ahead, you might be planning 3 turns ahead because you get whacked upside the noggin real good. That's really well done. It's clever. I like it. That having been said, despite the fact that there's all these interesting and good things in the Dragon and Flagon, and I do have a good time every time I play it, there are a couple of downsides to it. First of all, turns end up feeling very samey, precisely because it's taken a lot of the teeth out of the aggression. I hand you a couple points of reputation, I take a couple points of reputation from somebody else. Even big moves, even when you unlock your super move, which you get by grabbing the eponymous dragon, it doesn't feel all that tremendous. Like, I just take slightly more points away from you, or I do something slightly niftier that I couldn't have done before. They don't feel cataclysmic or seriously consequential. It just feels a little too transactional for my tastes. It's also the case that it really encourages conservatism. I mean, this is a game about a bar brawl, but at the same time, Smart play seems to be, I don't claim to be an expert player, but the people that I've seen win have just worked from the outside. They keep around the edges. They never get involved in a big brawl. The game very much discourages that. So if there's a din or a melee in the middle, you don't want to be part of that. You just want to kind of nip away at the edges and target people that are otherwise occupied. And, that's fine. It's clever play. It's just a little less satisfying than a sort of lighthearted, chaotic game of bashing chairs over people's heads than this would advertise. It's also the case that there's a lot of front-loaded information in this game. It's a relatively simple game, relatively easy, straightforward to play, but at the beginning of the game, you're handed a deck of over a dozen cards, loaded with text and modifiers, and you're said, play whichever one you want, whenever you want, more or less. And that's a lot to go through. It's very intimidating for new players. It's very intimidating for experienced players. I've played a bunch of times, and there's some cards I still haven't used, precisely because my mind can only wrap its head. My mind can only wrap its mind. Yeah, I subscribe to the homunculus theory. Look it up. There are homunculi, and the reductio goes ad infinitum. It's homunculi all the way down. Moving on. And as a result, there's just a lot of stuff in the system. Makes it hard to explain the game, makes it hard to learn the game, and it contributes to a sense of feeling overwhelmed. Or it contributes to really, really slow play. This game is only going to go as fast as its slowest player, and some people take forever. And I can't even really blame them because of all this stuff that they've got to navigate. It's like, do I play this card? Well, let me read it again. It's like, it takes a while. And so I've played games of this that last about an hour, like it says on the box. I've also played this game when it's above 2 hours. And at above 2 hours, this game is terrible. But you sometimes just don't know how long it's going to last going and how slow are these people. And when a slow player is taking their turn, everyone is sitting there staring at them, and it's no fun for anybody. When it moves quick, it's much better. But sometimes it drags, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that. Also, let me give one more gripe about the cards and the amount of text on them. Look, heads up, game designers. If you're going to put the effects of a card on a card, make it comprehensive. Either put none of the effects on the card, so I have to look it up, or I know I have to look it up, or put them all there. If you put 90% of the effects on a card, guess what? Those remaining 10%, I'm going to forget, and I'm never going to apply. And what's more, while playing the game, I'm going to have this nagging sense that I'm just doing everything wrong, because I remember that some of the cards don't mention some of their effects, and I should really remember what those are and look at the rulebook every time it happens, but I can't be bothered. There are a couple of cards like this in the Dragon and Flagon. The card text is not comprehensive, or they're weirdly referential. It's like, well, this card works exactly like this other card, except for these limitations, and so you have to look up the other card and see how that works. Again, for a game this simple, I shouldn't have to be doing things like that. I don't know if there would have been room on the cards to make everything comprehensive, but you should have made the effort, and it really annoys me that some of the cards are missing key modifiers. This is not complaining about errata. There's one error on one of the cards. That's fine, whatever, printing mistakes happen. This is about some of the cards being deliberately vague, I guess is the way to put it, for layout purposes. I disapprove. Another serious problem I have with the game, and this is very much a personal preference, is in games like this, chaotic, pre-programming, things like that, when something goes wrong, I want something funny, cool, or momentous to happen. For example, even in Robo Rally, a game I dislike, if you go the wrong way, you might end up targeting the wrong player and zapping someone you didn't mean to. Or you might end up running over a trap and getting some damage. And this may not necessarily be the funnest thing in the world for you, but it's at least funny for somebody there. Similarly, in Space Alert, if you do something wrong, the ship is probably going to take damage, something's going to happen. There's going to be a consequence, and the game state is going to be impacted, possibly in an interesting way. In the Dragon and Flagon, if you get something wrong, you're just going to do nothing. It's just a wasted turn, which is fine. I mean, you planned poorly, your target moved out of range. But that's not fun. It's just very anticlimactic. You spent all this time thinking about what card to play, everyone sat around the table waiting for you to do it, and then you reveal it and say, I do nothing, that's it. It's not as enjoyable to me as other games where something interesting happens when there was a misplay. Interesting misplays, after all, are some of the greatest joys in board gaming as far as I'm concerned. So what we have here is a relatively simple game with a rather large amount of rules overhead, and there's often that's an awkward place for game designs to be. And I've noticed that this is a trait of a lot of Engelstein designs. A lot of their games tend to be simple, fun, intended to be fast-moving affairs that have a surprising amount of rules overhead and grit, such that the rules explanation takes a surprisingly long time. The worst instance of this of theirs that they did was actually Space Cadets. Space Cadets I find to be too far over the edge. You have to explain what all the different roles do because, as over the course of the game, you might be expected to do lots of different rules. There's over half a dozen mini-games in that game, and none of them are particularly complicated, but when you explain all of them to everybody, and the mental transactional difficulty of switching from task to task starts to quickly become overwhelming, especially given how relatively light the game is, and how lighthearted it's intended to be. I much prefer Space Cadets Dice Duel, which, given that it's real-time, you get those interesting and funny misplays. The other team laughs when you miss and things like that. Don't worry, you'll be laughing at them soon enough. And you're only going to ever begin doing your one task. So if you want to, if you don't have the mental resources or if you're just a new gamer, you can be sat, and said, here's how your station works. Don't worry about the rest. But good players will know how all the stations work. I really like Space Cadets Dice Duel. The rules explanation is a bit of a bear, and it does intimidate new players, especially given how simple it is. But once you actually get going, it's really good. That's really, for me, the question of when an Engelstein design is worth it. Is it really smooth and fun once you get going? Dice Duel, that very much is the case for me. The normal Space Cadets, not so much. And the Dragon and Flagon, it really does depend on how fast people are playing, and whether or not people are willing to accept that, the goal of the game is to play relatively fast and loose and have fun. So, it really depends. As I say, I've enjoyed my playings of the Dragon and Flagon, and I think it does some interesting things with components and the lovely board, and with the action cards in terms of how much time it takes and the pre-programming and how the stunning works and how the damage system keeps everyone in the game at all times. All of this is for the good. But the difficulty of explaining the game to new players, how slow it can drag if someone is taking too long, the fact that I'm sympathetic to the fact that they're taking so long because of all the front-loaded information, it makes it a bit of an awkward fit. Honestly, when I get that many players together, we're talking about a large group game, the fact that it can accommodate many players is great, but when I get that many players together, I'd probably prefer to play something like Dice Duel, or maybe even lie and scream at them by playing the Resistance or Secret Hitler. So I think this is a good game, but unfortunately, its nagging problems keep me from fully endorsing it. Is it worth trying? I absolutely think that it's worth trying. I'm not sure I'm going to be keeping it, precisely because in its design space, it sits just on that precipice of being too complicated for its own good, given how light it is. Call it the Engelstein factor, because again, this is something about all their designs. Now, make no mistake, the next time the Engelsteins will be releasing a game, I will be trying it because they always do something interesting. It's just sometimes that comes with too much baggage and too much expense. So I say give it a shot. But, I don't know, maybe you don't want anything different in the fantasy genre. Maybe all you're looking for in a fantasy genre is a whole bunch of white paladins and semi-naked barbarians killing endless orcs. If so, I think you're wrong, but I forgive you. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care.